This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
10% of pediatric cancer is linked to a single gene variation. These variants can be detected in embryos before pregnancy begins. Orchid's whole genome reports can help mitigate your child's risk for cancer by screening for 90-plus genetic variants linked to pediatric cancer. Discuss embryo screening and IVF with a genetics expert. Hey, everybody. This is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning Podcast, and today I'm here with my friend Akshar Patel. Akshar, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. My name is Akshar. I run the Emissary, and I'm an Indian American. I just took the jump into doing this full-time. Previously, I was mostly doing a financial analyst for work, but right now I'm running a platform which seeks to examine a new India, as well as old, and seeing that churn in action, and a little bit of examination into diaspora as well.
Yeah, so I guess the first question that I have is why is this necessary? I mean, don't we have the media?
Dude, I remember I got into India really interested into India around less than 10 years ago, I'd say, probably 7-8 years ago. And I noticed there was a huge chasm between what the mainstream was saying and what Indians in India were saying. And that dichotomy, I guess that's what really piqued my interest. And then recently I went on a bit of a journey across India, across the south, the west, the north mostly. And you get to see a country in motion, really. And you get to see a country that's very different than the one that's in the New York Times.
Okay, so what is the biggest difference?
The biggest difference is Indians seem to have a huge sense of optimism to them. If you followed, say, the New York Times or Washington Post or Atlantic for the past decade, you would think that there's a genocide happening in India or civil war or economic meltdown or something really crazy, or people hate the government. There's obviously a good amount of criticisms of the government, and many of which are, valid. But in general, there is something I noticed when I was traveling across India. I try to talk to as many people as I could from every part of society, up and down, practicing my terrible Hindi. Something I noticed is people felt hey, our time is now. Something is changing in the air here. Something's changing in the dirt here. There's a new India coming.
Well, okay, so let me just ask you real quick. Mostly what a lot of the listeners are going to know about is Modi, who was described, I think, in the New York Times as a strongman recently. So I guess there is a debate on whether India is a democracy or not, whether it's liberal or not, all of this stuff. I think India, can be described in the New York. Look, if you read the mainstream media, I think India would be what Fareed Zakaria described as 25 years ago as an illiberal democracy. What do you say to that sort of statement?
I think that's actually a pretty good description. Indian society is fundamentally conservative, but at the top there's this strong upper crust inertia of extreme liberals, super Anglophile. And across India's history, there's always been a clash with that. I think that results in a illiberal democracy. They don't have the same sense of free speech as us, like many other countries like Europe, Africa, and, in Asia. But they don't have a similar sense of justice as us or equality. And that's India for good and the bad, I'd say.
Wait, what do you mean they don't have a similar sense of justice? I want you to unpack that.
One thing I don't like about India is there are laws that discriminate people based on caste. And obviously there's the very famous reservation affirmative action policy, which I think in its inception was very reasonable. Now it's ballooned and stuff, but more so what I'm talking about is something like the SC/ST Act, which is almost nearing like a blasphemy law, where say if an upper caste person says or is accused of, hurling an insult or discriminating against a lower caste person, they could be thrown in jail, like automatically. That's kind of wild.
So if I said chura in India, I could be thrown in jail.
I'm not as good as caste names as you are.
Okay, I think I'm gonna get a few comments, but whatever. It's America. Nobody knows what that means.
Yeah, but I think it happens across the spectrum too. I think every identity group in India, or most identity groups, say they're being treated unfairly, but they don't. Most of them aren't at the point of revolt. There's always that little tribalism, that zero-sum mentality, because of flaws like these.
Yeah, so let me, a lot of the listeners, they will know that I've written about caste and stuff like that. India is obviously very diverse. You're talking thousands of what they call communities, and so it's a really complicated situation that varies by region, as you saw. And you were talking about affirmative action. India started in this path in the 1950s, or like I guess the late 40s, like right after independence, and it has a very, very well defined, articulated affirmative action reservation system that applies in different states differently and in different aspects of the government. So it's, for example, like in tech, my understanding is there is no reservation, but in government jobs they're copious, right? And you have a situation where there are parts of the country where 60 to 80% of the population or whatever has some level of affirmative action. I mean, basically the tribal people and the scheduled caste, like the Dalits, like 10 to 20% of the population have a lot of affirmative action. And then you have this whole middle group of other backward castes, OBC, which is basically whoever decides they are. It seems like it's always contested. I mean, it varies by state to state. And then you have kind of the general category, the upper caste, which basically that's the good majority, like that's like 85%. Like last I looked at the census of Hindu Americans who are Indian, 85% would be general category in India, whereas I think in India that's like 30% of the population.
Yeah, 20-30 about.
Yeah. And so you have like this really diverse country that we in America see these generalizations about. So obviously you're not a Muslim, you're a Hindu, but there is a lot of talk about religious oppression and marginalization and all that stuff. But you might not be a Muslim, but you are an American, so you have an outsider view. So like, tell me what you saw.
So one, I think there's a Pew survey that really delves into Indian Muslim attitudes towards, I don't know how they feel about India, how they feel about other religions in India. It's pretty overwhelmingly positive. They feel pretty included. They feel not necessarily persecuted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a data. However, like when you go onto the ground in India and say try to put yourself into the shoes of a Muslim or a Muslim, and you look at your WhatsApp, basically. Imagine you're part of a WhatsApp, or like you're a Muslim family, you look at your WhatsApp, or you're on the street. I can understand the point of view that a lot of Indian Muslims say they feel, a lot of, spokesmen for Indian Muslims say they feel that there is a sense of, alienation or persecution, or more so, I think alienation is a better word, feeling definitely different than how Indian Muslims did back in the day, in a negative way. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So is this having to do with the Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, the idea that India is a Hindu nation? Is that the issue?
Yeah, I think because there's been a lot stronger assertion of Hinduism as a political idea, so Hindutva, and I think that's the main asset or facet of it. When I was traveling in Delhi and I went to Jama Masjid and I talked to some of the people there, like there was a Maulana there was a Muazzin there. So these guys are clued in, high-ranking members of like the Muslim community. This is their opinion that a lot of this is caused by the BJP and not necessarily other parties. Now, I think personally, from I guess my analysis, I think a lot of this is to do with the fact that in India, there's not a secular law. Like what I reference in terms of justice and treating people equally, India does not have a universal code of laws for like a Muslim, a Sikh, a Hindu, a Christian, et cetera, et cetera. There are separate codes, and this also extends to institutions and stuff like that. So in certain ways, certain minorities, I would say, have maybe extra positions of power or extra leeway in certain aspects of society. that is starting to be taken away. And that feels like, hey, you're taking away my rights at that point. So I get it from both ends, I'd say.
So when I applied for my multiple entry visa a couple of months ago, there was a field for religion, and I could not select no religion.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, that's interesting.
So I selected other. I don't know. I wasn't going to select any of the religions because I'm not religious anyway. Yeah, so it's just they didn't bother to think that someone that would be visiting India would not have a religion. You know what I'm saying? It's just like goes to show you like just the mental straitjacket people are in.
That is fascinating. I would have never assumed that. I mean, I get what you're saying, because in India, what you're born into, it is an attachment in an almost ethnic way, like what religion you're born into. There's definitely a lot of Hindu atheists, quote unquote. But I've even seen, especially in the elite sections, there are non-practicing Muslims who are very into their Muslim culture, but don't really, pray and stuff like that, or maybe even believe.
Yeah, many years ago, I actually met a guy. He was from Kerala. He was born into a Christian family, Jacobite Christian family, but he married a Hindu woman, and his personal religious beliefs were pretty much Hindu. But he would complain to me that like all of his in-laws would refer to him as the Christian, even though he was a more regular temple goer than any of them were. So he would just like complain to me. I mean, it wasn't like a big deal, but it was annoyed him that it's like what he was born like dictated people's perceptions. And that's just how it is there, I guess, right?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know why that is, but I'm guessing it's something related to maybe caste or sub-regionality or things like that.
Well, I mean, so many people do not, people are born into their community, they marry in their community, so it's like, the idea. Well, so I remember, our friend, we have a mutual friend, Mukunda Raghavan. I remember telling him once that he's Indian American, and like he's a very cosmopolitan guy. Don't need to get details of his personal life, but he's just a typical American bro, lawyer, a friend of mine in California. But he was shocked when I told him that 40% of Americans change their religion in their lifetime, whereas like in India, that obviously is extremely low.
Yeah, very, very low. I guess it's because of one thing I definitely noticed in India is their definition of diversity is completely different than, say, our American definition, where we're more of a melting pot. The ways I've heard described over there, it's like, I don't know, like a thali, like, those huge thalis with like 12 different items, even a salad. But thali was, I guess, especially the one described.
Well, because in a thali, it's like what, like everything is separated. There's a lot of different things, but they're very distinct and separate.
They only mix sometimes. So I think that was a good description, because that's what I saw, especially even in big cities. That was one of the craziest things. Like there was a guy I met. He was super nice. Name's Rohan. He showed me around Mumbai, and he was telling me about like these different quarters. Obviously, the Parsi quarter, the Hindu quarter, Muslim quarter, these historical quarters. But then it went down to region and sub-region and caste. So I'm not going to, give too much information about his personal life, but basically, he was telling me about a scenario where there was a member of his community, and his sole occupation for his entire life, pretty much, now he's retired, is he did a catering company just for his subset region and just for his caste, basically. So that he ran that his entire life, and he did well for himself.
It's because they have a very specific dietary right,
diets and customs and everything like that. So that becomes very salient in a way that, for I guess outsiders, it's very difficult to understand.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you have to experience it. So, wait, what is I mean, I know you've gone to India before, I think. So, like, what is this the longest period you've gone though?
Yeah, for sure. And this was the first time I went like mostly solo. So that was quite a shock, especially for a person who does. I mean, I could understand Hindi decently. I could speak Hindi to pass by. But in the South, it was very different, where a lot of people, they didn't speak Hindi, and a lot of people also didn't speak English. So navigating that was a bit difficult, but it was fun.
Okay, so they didn't speak English, so they didn't speak Hindi. So they were speaking Tamil or whatever. So how did you make yourself like understood? Was it Google Translate?
Yeah. Technology was a big plus now, dude. Especially like with AI and Translate and ChatGPT, I use a lot. That really helped me get by, especially with like obviously the upper echelons of society, they'll be speaking English, but say you need to get a cab, even say a Uber, a lot of these guys they just didn't speak English as much, which I found was kind of surprising. They would speak a bit, but not as much as
Oh
I
yeah.
thought they would.
So I guess here's a question I have in terms of logistics. What's the information technology like accessibility like? Uber's everywhere. Like,
Hmm. Uber's everywhere in cities, but when I went to rural areas, it was a lot less accessible. And that's when you really needed to, get on the street and catch a rickshaw and really talk with the locals and stuff like that. So, like, especially I was in the rural areas of Gujarat visiting with my family, and I couldn't catch an Uber. I just had to, find my way.
okay, wait. So, could everybody recognize that you were American just by your mannerisms, or?
Hmm. Some people could not actually. One time funny enough, I wore like this plain white kurta, the classic, like Rahul Gandhi type look. And that was the day I went to Jama Masjid, and people would be assuming I'm from Delhi proper. I guess I just really hit the look that day. But yeah, not as many comments about like my mannerisms or skin tone or stuff like that. Yeah, I was kind of surprised. 10 years prior, I got a lot. They could tell me out instantly, but now
Do
not
you
as much.
do you think that's partly because of convergence between India and the U.S. in a lot of ways?
Yeah, and I noticed this when I went to the cities, especially somewhere posh like South Bombay or Bandra or certain parts of Delhi, but especially in Mumbai and Bangalore, I'd say you'd see people who look Indian American, and I don't know how to describe it, but like in 2012, which was the last somewhat long trip I went. Actually, 2005 is another really long trip I went. And I went in 2023 as well, but we'll go 10 years back, a decade back. That's better. I would not see people who look like that, if you know what I'm saying. Like they
Yeah,
look like second gen Indian Americans.
I mean, they could have been though. There are people that go back, but I guess what you're saying is just a
But then I'd hear
convergence
them
of.
talk. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, so there's been a convergence. So it's like through the internet, English language and stuff. There's been a convergence, right?
Yeah. Fashion. I think also nutrition maybe as well. I don't know. I literally don't know. It's really strange, but it's cool. No hate.
So you were in the South. Wait, did you go to Chennai?
Did I go to Chennai? I think I did. Yeah. Did I go? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I went to Chennai. Yeah.
So this is a big country, obviously, and if you go to the U.S., you can tell that you're in the South versus the Northeast versus the West. There's some generalizations. What did you see? Like what jumped out at you besides like the obviously okay, people in the South are smaller, darker skinned, or whatever, but like but in terms of like day to day, the way people interact, the way to get around, like was there or is it a pretty from your perspective, is it a relatively homogenous national culture?
No, definitely not. One thing I learned and I appreciated in India, especially the solo parts of my travel, was that like, look, like I have a strong belief in Indian unity and like the project of India. I think it's a very amazing thing. I've always had less than, positive attitudes towards Indian regionalism and linguistic states, which I think are new. I mean, they are new inventions. Like that's the truth. However, as I traveled India, and especially after I went to Gujarat and Mumbai, which has a large Gujarati population, I understood the appeal of Indian linguistic regionalism and why it's very important to people. I felt way more at home in Gujarat and even Mumbai, which I was totally solo, than most other places in India because of that linguistic link and that cultural link.
Well, so it's just you could understand the speech on the street, the idioms, stuff like that.
That and also there was definitely differences in how people acted. Like people from NCR are notoriously like
Wait,
well,
what's NCR?
National Capital Region, which is around Delhi. So it's a sprawling region, spreading out in Delhi, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh. Very, very developing region. It's very dynamic. However, people from around there are they're a bit notoriously like standoffish. Versus if you go to Mumbai, people are a lot more cosmopolitan and nicer to you. Bangalore, I think people are a bit more reserved. They're nice too, but there's a bit more extroversion in Mumbai. And
Well, I think the what I've heard is South Indians tend to be more reserved than people from the north, especially Punjabis. But maybe
yeah,
that's anyone.
yeah,
I mean, that might be anyone versus Punjabis, right?
yeah. Punjabis are special, that's for sure.
Wait, so
Um,
did you go to Punjab, or you mostly in Delhi?
Mostly in Delhi, but Delhi is in a way an extension of Punjab
Yeah,
and even Haryana itself. The culture, it's a continuum. So there's a lot of Punjabis there anyway. So it's a big part of the culture,
I
which
think
is really cool to see.
maybe Delhi to Punjab is kind of like Mumbai to Gujarat, right?
I'd say maybe, yeah, I'd say that or closer. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, because geographically there's no
Yeah.
separation. It
Well,
borders on Haryana, right?
from what I know, and I don't want to be a bit, regionalist here, but I've heard Gujaratis were kind of imported into Mumbai as it developed, because it's a bit of a recent city in terms of becoming big. So I think the British imported a lot of Gujaratis. They did a lot of business there, especially like the Parsis and stuff, but also Gujaratis in general. So they kind of really built up the city in there for multi generations. From my understanding, Delhi is a very historic city. However, it just has had a recent boom with the influx of Punjabi migrants or refugees from partition. So I think its Punjabification is maybe a lot more recent than the
Yeah.
Gujaratification of Mumbai.
Yeah. So yeah, because like during partition, you had Pakistan, India. They basically swapped.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So they've done very good for themselves. I think it's a great story for the Punjabi community. They've really done very well in Delhi.
So let's loop back to caste. You're anti-caste, I guess, or whatever. Like you don't think much of it, but you went to India and you kind of indicate that the country is still defined a lot by that social cultural feature. So one of the things that I have said, and this is just based on numbers, not personal experience, is that the interaction between peoples of different communities is just too great for this institution to stay stable for more than a couple of centuries at this point. Like, what do you think of that assertion?
Hmm. The biggest enemy of caste is Tinder, I think, or like these dating apps, man.
Wait,
People love.
they have Tinder. They have Tinder in India.
I think they have Tinder. Yeah.
Wait, do they have a caste option on the bio?
I don't think so. From what I know from dating apps in general, like you don't. Most people, a lot of them, they don't put their last names and stuff. So, but the reason I say that more of an extension to that is urbanity, and this is an area where I also changed my ideas. Like I think way back when I first started learning about India, I was very vehemently anti-caste. But as I started learning about what caste is and what it means to people, and this is people from all, upper, lower, middle, whatever, every caste, essentially. To them, it's like an ethnicity. Like it's their tradition, it's their culture, it's like a business network, it's like physical security. It has a lot of salience, like besides just straight religious or ritualistic purposes. So I even saw that when I was traveling in India, and I would go to, somewhere like outside of Chennai, there's this amazing temple. It's Ramanuja's birthplace. Ramanuja he's this great acharya, and he was a big philosopher in southern India, and his ideas spread across India. But anyways, it's mostly patronized, at least, or run by this specific subset of Tamil Brahmins. I don't know if it's Iyenars or Iyengars. I forgot what. But you see their rituals. You see, like, this is a tough life. And, like, someone who chooses to go into this occupation, it's not, for glory or anything like that, or for riches or anything. This is like a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice and stuff like that. So I became a lot more amiable towards caste traditions. And if people want to live their lives separately like that, I mean, whatever, that's fine. They still interact with the world. Like I think the real separateness that caste used to have has grinded away, and there is kind of a modern idea of it. That being said, urbanity, I agree with you. Urbanity and intermarriage, this is going to profoundly change India. And I think a lot of Indians aren't ready for this huge cohort of intercaste marriages and, offspring and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, because like obviously, like something like the reservation affirmative action system is based on endogamy as a prior.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but that's the thing. Caste is patrilineal. However, like intercaste people from who I've spoken to, they definitely do not like identify with, just the father's caste or something like that, as, say an endogamous kid would. So
But
there's a clear break.
It's not the, it's fundamentally not the same. Like, I've had friends who are half Jewish and raised as Jews, but like they know that they're perceived differently, and they know they have connections to the non-Jewish world that their cousins who are full Jewish do not have.
Mhm.
Right? It just changes your whole social network, and your perception of just like the circles of connections you have to the world out there.
Yeah. So before like I said, I used to have a lot more, antipathy towards caste. Now I just think it's whatever, man. It's there. Like, let's stop caste discrimination. I don't think it's going to last against modernity. Like, there's always going to be a small group, but there's going to be profound, huge change in Indian society and even Hinduism, and I guess extended from the society, Indian state mechanisms. Because now you have all these intercaste kids. What do they do with reservation and these caste-based policies and stuff?
Well, so for reservation, so I actually don't know. If your dad is a Brahmin or your dad is a Dalit, is that what officially determines your caste for reservation? Like, how does that work?
I think I need to honestly dig into this. I think it's patrilineal, but I think there may be an option for intercaste people to choose either or. I guess they have to present evidence with that as well, but I'm unsure, to be honest.
Yeah. Well,
Hasn't
also
really been a problem like that.
probably it varies by state too,
Yes, definitely.
because like it's not
Huge
like there's
variation.
a not single national system for everything. So like I think like for example, when I was looking this up, like Jats in Rajasthan are OBC, and obviously in Punjab and Haryana they're not. So
Yeah.
it's just like you just negotiate different positions based on what you can. A lot of it seems to do with power. So speaking of power, India has been developing economically, being becoming a geopolitical force.
Mhm.
Tell me on the ground what you saw in regards to economic development, the differences from a decade ago. You're talking about the optimism. I think a lot of the optimism has to do with economic growth, right?
Yeah. I remember when I went in 2005, that was my first long trip. I was there for a month and I was 12. And it was so depressing, man. Like, you go through India and you see this just like crushing hopelessness, the cynicism, this poverty. But then when I went to Gujarat, I was in Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, and eventually we made our way to Gujarat. I saw a highway for the first time, like a proper, Interstate 95 type of highway you see in America. And that was like, okay, this is the first time. This is like a sign of hope. Now, when I went, 2023, I think was a big shock because that's I went in 2012 for like 2 weeks or a week, but I was like just at my aunt's place, which is fairly nice, and I just stayed there. But 2023 and this time, like, you just see so much construction, which is crazy, especially in somewhere like big cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, especially Mumbai though, and the adjacent areas of NCR and Haryana, which is being built up, Gujarat as well, almost everywhere to be honest. But the most shocking, and I've tweeted this out, they're building a high-speed rail here, but this Western Crescent in India from Ahmedabad or Ahmedabad in Gujarat, the capital of Gujarat, straight down the coast to Mumbai, and then nearby to Pune and Nashik and stuff. This is becoming one of the most developing areas in India. Most construction in the world, I think, is in this area right now, and it's crazy to see. And you see the optimism from there. And there's a gradient though. Villages are definitely lagging behind heavily, and even in Gujarat, one of the most developed areas in India. But when you go to the suburbs, you see people moving in from villages. So you see all this new construction, these fairly nice houses, and it's wild. Like, I asked my uncle, "Is this for NRIs? Because these are fairly nice houses," and he's like, "No, this is for locals. They're coming in from the villages now." So that's really big. It's infrastructure, which is really driving a lot of this, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, so just for the listener context, India's economy, obviously there's variation between the states. Like Punjab has like a strong agricultural sector. Parts of the South, Bangalore, have the IT sector. But, Gujarat and Maharashtra, which has Mumbai, like that whole center west coastal zone has really been kind of the economic powerhouse of the Indian subcontinent, of India, of the Republic of India, like since partition, that region. And if you look at the statistics, the mercantile castes or communities of Gujarat in particular are the ones that tend to be represented among the list of moguls, like literal, like moguls, not in Mughals, but like as in like the billionaire families, like the Ambanis and whatnot. And a lot of the others are Parsi, who are also Gujarati speaking. So this is the region of India that is contributing to it is the economic engine, really.
Yeah, it's I guess this is another plus for regionalism, but it's a unique culture. Maybe one day I'll delve into it a bit. I'm still kind of mystified by why it's this side of India necessarily. I know it's been, I think, since the Bronze Age, essentially, since the Indus Valley, this is where a lot of shipping has come from, or trade in India. So it's always had that kind of millennia old culture. But now, I think one thing about Gujarati culture that I noticed, it's a bit like America. In America, they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires. So people give a lot of leeway to business and, these big wigs and just billionaires or millionaires in general. In Gujarat, there's temporarily embarrassed crororepatis, or essentially millionaires, where every strata of society wants to engage in entrepreneurship or mercantilism or businesses and stuff like that. That's an extremely unique thing in India, where socialism has traditionally dominated, still dominates, definitely. Even in Gujarat and areas like that, there's a lot of welfare. And this is one part, like I remember when Modi first took over in 2014, a lot of people expected Reagan or Thatcher or some huge, strong neoliberal push. And initially, I think in the first 2 years, there may have been an attempt for that, but he quickly retreated because I think he correctly sensed that, hey, if I go down this path, I'm going to do really good for India, but that's probably going to happen in like 5-10 years, and I'm going to get voted out. So his first term, something that they did that was very good, I'd say, is they did a digitized welfare system. So a lot of the old welfare, which used to get sucked up in terms of middlemen and stuff like that, now it was all digitized. Demonetization, which is really controversial, where they exchanged the notes in India, that pushed digitization and financial inclusion hugely, just exponentially. It skyrocketed within almost overnight. So now everyone had bank accounts. Welfare comes in more directly. I think that's been a net good, honestly. I think it is kind of good that he didn't go down this liberalization route initially. He instead made people connected to the market and able to participate and save and things like that. So I think that's a unique part of India's economic story.
Yeah, some of the listeners might know my friend Kushal Mehra. He's a businessman in Mumbai, but also a podcaster. And he always told me like years ago, he's like, man, you don't understand. Like everyone here, and he wasn't saying this positively, but he said everyone here is some type of socialist. It's like real libertarianism has never been tried in India.
Yeah, definitely not. I think part of it is, and this is one of the things that holds India back, its diversity is awesome and stuff. Like, okay, yeah, it's cool to look at, it's cool to participate in, but it creates a lot of zero-sum mentality, especially, since the Republic's onset, where this was a country that was just, economically destroyed, deindustrialized, and then from the get-go, they started socialism. So this created almost a permanent scarcity mentality within generations, a jealousy in between groups where they'd see, oh, hey, the government is benefiting this group. Now we're gonna agitate, we're gonna rebel, we're gonna not vote. So it really impedes liberalism and this type of privatization and just these right-wing economic policies. I think that's a big inertia in India.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stylized fact would be the whole idea that you divide the pie up or you grow the pie, and growing the pie that's an American view, but it's actually a minority view in the world, and historically it's a minority view. Generally, you look at how you divide the pie up, right?
Yes, yeah. And I think Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, he recently passed away. He's I think a big stock guy in India, possibly a billionaire, but they called him the Big Bull. He was a very, very aggressive stock trader in India. He made this analogy that Modi, the first term, he brought people into the pie. A lot of times they couldn't even participate in that pie itself. So because of a lot of this digital inclusion, because of things like infrastructure, these connectivities, and even internet access with geo and stuff, now people actually got to even be a part of the pie. Prior, the massive informal Indian economy and just the regions not being connected itself, they just couldn't even get a piece of the pie.
Well, I mean, you're talking about regions and regionalism, and I will say, so for example, in terms of different communities, different groups with their own different customs and cultures, like I've seen it myself personally. Don't need to go into details, but in Calcutta or Kolkata, the business community has traditionally been, I think, Marwari, from Western India, and they've been there for centuries. And they still speak Hindi among themselves. Actually, some of the more recent generations have not even learned Bengali anymore because you don't need to. There's so many Hindi speakers in Calcutta. But that just goes to show that, like, the cultural differences, the separation, like Bengalis have basically just been like, okay, you just do the business stuff, and they've been like that for like 300 years. Like they can't be bothered to actually, engage in enterprise themselves. So they leave it to a whole different social cultural group within their state.
I think that's a testament to Bengali tolerance or mutual respect. I mean, that's across India as well. But the point I do give to linguistic regionalists is that I think it is right. I'm an outsider here, so maybe I shouldn't even go on the subject. But I do think it is right for people to migrate. When they migrate to a certain place, they should probably learn the language and culture and stuff. So I could get the angst in regards to a lot of Southern people.
Yeah,
I've noticed they get really upset when a lot of migrants don't learn their language and stuff like that. So I get that. I think that that's real. However, one thing I will say, and this is the degradation of there's two things: the degradation of regional languages. First of all, they speak in a pidgin. Essentially, they speak a lot of mixed English with their words. You see this all the time. It's epidemic in India. Number two, it is like a natural phenomenon. It's a market phenomenon that Hindi is spreading. It's not like an imposition by the government. This is a pure natural market phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Pengtua, like the common tongue in China. It's at like 70% now. It's like a standard Mandarin, as opposed to the regional Mandarins in central China or the dialects in the south. So, yeah, I mean, globalization, internal, just national unity is going to create this sort of unified. Although I do think Hindi does spread more easily among Indo-Aryan language speakers, obviously, because it's just easier to pick up a language that's closer to your language. I think that's the big issue with the South, because the Southern languages are so distinct. It's a much bigger lift, and people don't want to bother.
Yeah. That's definitely true as well. I think another big driver, funny enough, it's on the bottom of India. It's YouTube. YouTube is colossal in India. People are addicted to it. That's something I found. Even rickshaw drivers, they will be watching YouTube all the time. And obviously, there's a regional languages in YouTube as well. But they get to transport themselves to other parts of India and other Indian cultures at an instant. But at the upper echelons or even middle class of Indian society, you see these migration into these big cities. And what is a lingua franca in many big cities? It would be, at least for a large segment, Hinglish, a mix between English and Hindi. So you just graduated from college, you go off to Mumbai or something like that. You might be from like Tamil Nadu. A lot of your colleagues, when you guys are like having happy hour or lunch or whatever, hanging out, they speak in Hinglish. So that's another way I think it's spreading as well. This is a natural part I'm saying. Yeah.
Does Hinglish? So I've heard Hinglish before, and it's just really confusing to me because I don't know Hindi, but I know English.
Mm-hmm.
Are there rules how the substitutions occur? Because what I hear is like Hindi, English, Hindi, English, Hindi. Like, is there kind of understood like where you substitute?
I don't know. What I've noticed though is very technical terms, say like computer. I don't know the Hindi term for computer or Gujarati term for computer. A lot of these technical terms, it seems to automatically go to English, but also I can't decipher it, to be honest. It's totally random. I don't know how these people think. It's pretty fascinating to see it in action, but they do it instantaneously.
So a question: can you speak English yourself, or can you just understand it?
I could understand it. Speaking it would it would be so weird. When I speak Gujarati, because I speak Gujarati with my parents, if I don't know a word, I'll default back to English. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Right. So you were there during the winter, which is like the optimal time, I guess, to go
yeah.
to India. I guess a question that I have that I've wondered about is, do you think I'm wondering particularly about Delhi's summer weather? Do you think that that could be like a break on development in any way? Because it just gets so hot there. Like I'm talking about in the spring when it gets up to like
Yeah.
110 Fahrenheit regularly.
I remember I would be going. Delhi was surprisingly cool when I went, but say when I went to the south or Mumbai or stuff like that, where it would get 90 degrees plus, people would be wearing like hoodies and stuff or like long sleeve, and obviously I didn't understand, but for them, I guess it's not too hot. But I think once it does hit over 100, it becomes. I did a tweet today, like literally, it's hellish. I don't know how they do it. Um, it seems like when I'd see development, that people would still be working in those conditions, or they'd be working at night. I remember traveling in Mumbai at night, and they were building the coastal road, and you'd be traveling in darkness, and all of a sudden you see all these bright lights to your right on the coast, and it's like they're welding things, or they're all these sparks are coming up. So yeah, I think a lot of it just switches to night work, but yeah, the heat thing is really crazy, dude. Especially in the hotter months. I don't know how people do it really, but I said today I was like it should be a nocturnal society at that point because yeah, it's not like a UAE or Saudi where everyone has AC. A lot of people just don't, and that's a lot of people are working on the street. They're hawkers and stuff, so that is brutal. I don't know how they do it, but
Well,
I don't think it's that big of an impediment. Which is, yeah, it is what it is.
so you're a vegetarian.
Yeah.
So how pervasive is vegetarianism in India? How easy is it to get food? All that stuff.
Very, very easy. Like you don't even have to think twice. Like that's a short, easy answer. I will say though, that India in many ways, like when I went in 2023, I remember landing in Delhi. I have a lot, I have a lot of not too kind things to say about Delhi, but the food there is great. But sometimes I think this is the American in me. You just get tired of just having Indian food over and over and over again, and you want food that doesn't taste like it's just smacking the shit out of your tongue. Like it's so strong in terms of flavor. You want like a bagel, or you want like something just like chill. Just give me something. And something I don't like in India. American food is usually done very badly, like extremely badly. Um,
Well,
so yeah, it's just overly
so what's
sauced.
so what's the pizza like? Indian pizza.
Look here, I liked Domino's and Pizza Hut because it was a bit of a break. But and I like those versions actually better than the American ones. This was an exception, at least the American Domino's and pizza and stuff. However, you're not going to get like finding a good Neapolitan or obviously proper New York slice or almost definitely not deep dish. You're not getting that there. So yeah, that food kind of was difficult for me in India because I just got tired of the Indian food. But I think most people for the first 2 weeks, you're gonna have like a blast. Like it's just amazing.
And so, what is that? Okay, this is just a random question. What is the Uber Eats like? What is like the the sharing economy, whatever? All these other things. Like in the cities, everything is like just like the U.S. or
Dude, this is a major part of I think India's underclass economy and the servant culture of India. And this is a lot of times when people are exposed to this, especially on Twitter, I see people have like crazy reactions. Um, so this the Uber Eats, or I think they have Swiggy and Zomato are the two big ones there. Swiggy and Zomato. Um, you can get stuff like almost within like 10-15 minutes instantly, like just food around you, which is kind of unheard of in I think a lot of American cities, and it's fairly cheap. It's very, very cheap. I think I've heard Indians complain about the rising prices, but compared it to America, it's super, super cheap. And I don't know, it's a tough life for these delivery boys I've seen. Like they're constantly on the clock, they're constantly moving, waiting. If it's hot as hell, cold as hell.
there's no delivery girls.
Huh, now that you mention that, no. Like I didn't see a single one.
Okay.
So that's a big thing, but I think that's an overarching part about the servant culture in India, which I was talking to a friend over there, and he was telling me it's probably going to disappear soon. Not soon, but maybe in like a few decades, with the rise of India's economy and this growing middle class, and just I have some opinions on it. Like obviously, whatever it is, what it is. Like it's in India. It's and these people are getting employed and stuff like that. But the people, like when I stayed at nice hotels, I noticed a lot of rich Indians would be very mean to say some of these people, even the workers
Yeah.
there or some of the
Yeah.
servant people. And that one of my theories about India is the inequality right now. Like I've seen multiple things. Like one that the inequality is increasing. Then I saw another stat that no, the Gini coefficient has actually shrunk. So whatever the data is, the things that you see in front of you, it's just the starkest amount of inequality you'll ever see, like almost anywhere. Mumbai, especially, is very interesting in that you'll see these islands of affluence across these, say, middle class or poor areas, and people travel through these all the time. Now you also have social media, so people see what's going on in the lives of the rich and famous in Instagram. People, a decade or two back in India, the India's underclasses, they did not see this before. I think this could all generate undercurrent of resentment in the long term in India, and that becomes very dangerous. That's when you have the return
Yeah.
of a lot of these crazy socialist ideas, and now they're laced with caste and stuff, so it could get very ugly in a Maoist way. But that's not what India is right now. However, I think the servant culture combined with inequality, combined with social media, it's a recipe that the Indian government needs to watch out for, especially like the BJP, a party that wants to develop India and continue its rightward shift in terms of economy and things like that.
Yeah, I will give a personal insight from Bangladesh. I have an uncle who's a very wealthy man. Even by American standards, he would be wealthy, and he complained. I think it was like a decade ago. He complained that he couldn't get servant girls for his houses anymore. He had to drive deep into the country because they all were working in these apparel, like these textile factories.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like in Bangladesh, obviously it has a different economic model than India, which is more, I don't want to use the word holistic, but it's not like purely export driven. There's a lot of internal consumption going on, which has actually been good for India over the last couple of years because, the end of zero interest rate period and everything like that. There's been massive issues with export-oriented economies like Bangladesh. But anyway, it's lower middle class to lower classes are being absorbed by these manufacturing jobs. And so that's made it really hard for a lot of people that traditionally we just took for granted. I mean, I don't even know if like the servants are always paid. I think they're just like fed and given housing and stuff like that. Traditionally, it's probably not like that anymore. But economic development just changes things. When people have cash, they have freedom. That's just how it is.
One thing I have heard, so obviously there's a lot of the bad stuff about servant culture in India that you hear, but one thing I've heard is it is decently common amongst at least the upper parts of society to pay for their kids' education or these certain huge, quality of life improvements for them. And I don't know necessarily about like mistreatment and stuff like that. I can't speak to that because I haven't really seen it. But yeah, it obviously is a voluntary thing. So these people are being employed. I guess their lives are getting better. But I definitely agree with you. Like as India's manufacturing finally starts, coming to fore, and India's economy starts transforming, this lifestyle and this occupation, it's going to wane, and that's another big change in India.
Well, so we've been talking for a while, so I want to pivot back to geopolitics, kind of. India was, I think, it tended to be part of the non-aligned movement after World War II, the early Cold War period. Eventually, it kind of tacitly tilted more towards the Soviet bloc for a while, even though it wasn't like, it was never part of obviously it was never a communist country or whatever, but Pakistan was firmly, let's be honest, an American client. Therefore, to balance things out, India traditionally had a alliance with the Soviet Union, which I think still persists in terms of like just good positive feelings towards Russia, which actually emerged during the whole Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay, that was still there. The reservoir that was there. So I think more recently, India has been pretty pro-American. There's been some hostilities with China. Kind of a cold war with China in some ways. So
Yeah.
what did you see when you were there?
This is actually interesting. Well, I'll lean first on the Pew data, or I think either Pew or someone else did surveys. So overall, Indians are pretty positive towards Americans. However, a noticeable change I've seen first online, and then after in person when I was talking to people. People obviously, they admire America for being just wealthy and successful, but they don't admire American culture as much nowadays. And they definitely do not like American interference in Indian affairs. That was a constant complaint I was hearing from people I was talking to. I think the idea about NGOs, which used to be, they're so pervasive in India, but even before, and they wielded colossal power. People are starting to see them as, vehicles of foreign interference. They don't like the pontificating from the Biden admin, especially. They definitely don't like mainstream media coverage. It's junk to them now. They don't really care as much about the crazy stuff that's in the New York Times or, Wall Street Journal or a lot of these articles. There's definitely a sour taste in the mouth of a lot of Indians in terms of American coverage. And this is mostly on the left side. I think this was before the major racist rise in Twitter right now amongst the right or alt-right. So it was mostly complaining about left-wing culture war stuff and interference coming into India. So that I think that's a warning sign for the American admin. Because a lot of opinion-making American elite or Indian elites are starting to buy into this now, where, hey, these guys, we're friends of convenience right now, but our values and our interests in many cases just do not align. So, yeah.
Well, a lot of this has to do with the global left hostility to Hindu nationalism, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, that's almost exclusively what it is. I think there are people who say they love India, but they actually love the idea of India. And this is the idea of India as the epitome of a lot of these liberal or left ideas. Hey, this is this secular, super diverse state where everyone's living in harmony. And, there's a strong emphasis of social justice. And it's just, if that was true, it would just be an amazing experiment to point to. Hey, look, our ideologies won. And, we lifted up the brown man. We lifted up the brown heathen, essentially, into the ideas of the left, and they prospered. But that just didn't happen in India. So now you have this alternative ideology that's flourishing.
Yeah. So, for the listeners out there, what is Hindutva? What is Hindu nationalism? I know you write about it a lot, and obviously you were in India recently. This is a nation now ruled or dominated by a party that was founded on Hindu nationalism.
Mm-hmm. It's a bit like Hinduism itself, because when people ask what's Hinduism, you'll get 10,000 different answers. Hindu nationalism, you'll probably get maybe 100 different answers, but it's first, I think it was a reactionary movement to the perceived excesses of both British colonialism as well as Turkic or Islamic rule. One of the biggest fuel data points I could give you for Hindutva is there's almost no pre-Islamic Hindu temple or temple at all in the northern half of the Indian subcontinent. They're pretty much all destroyed or they're defaced. That's that's a big deal, especially for a population that's still very conservative and religious. But I think it more so rose very late in the Republic of India. One, I'd say because of Nathuram Godse. He was a Hindu nationalist and he killed Mahatma Gandhi. And that set the ideology back, decades, literally. So now there's this ideology, which I would define as, a political manifestation of Hindu interests, or the idea that India should be a country that caters to Hinduism. It should preserve it. It should protect it. Not just I'd say Hinduism, but also all dharmic religions. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and even Sikhism. This is where you can have multiple definitions. But anyways, let's just keep it at Hinduism for now, and maybe a few others. But I think it rose in later decades because of the excesses of Indian secularism, where it's not, the difference between church and state or the separation between church and state. That's not what Indian secularism is. It's, hey, the government gives different amounts of patronism to different religious groups, and in many cases, excess patronism or excess leeway towards minority religious groups. And this results in a Hindu backlash. And I could go on and on about this, but I think in the 90s, early 90s, with the destruction of the Babri Masjid, that was India's, I guess, cultural revolution in a way. And that's, the site of Ram Temple. And when I was there, actually, my initial first days in India, that was when Ram Mandir was being inaugurated. And they call it a Pran Pratishtha, which is basically infusing the idol with, godlike substance. That's the best way I could put it.
Yeah.
So you got to see it in full force.
Let me give you refer to a lot of things which, like, I think a lot of the brown people in the audience will know what you're talking about, but let me like rewind really quickly. So basically there's this was it the birthplace of Ram?
Yeah, birthplace of Ram.
So there's a place in northern India, north central India, that's I think, is it Ayodhya? No, it's not Ayodhya. Where it is Ayodhya. Okay. Yeah. So that's the birthplace of Ram. There was a mosque, a Muslim house of worship that was built on that location. And the TLDR is over the last 35 years now. Yeah, 35 years. There have been communal conflicts, riots between Hindus and Muslims about building the Ram temple on the location of his putative birthplace. There was a mosque there, and they obviously didn't want to tear down the mosque. It became like a focal center for Hindu nationalists like angst. And it just like spun out into all sorts of weird ways across the culture. But it's like, I think like maybe you could think of it as a Schelling point. It's just like this, like it's like a public place where you can like, make your stand. And so recently a Hindu temple was inaugurated there. And it was a huge, like basically I think the vast majority of Hindus or Indian people that I saw online were just like flipping out over it, like in a good way. They were just like, this was like incredible. I think the way that you might want to people might want to think about it would be, like a little bit like the Spanish Reconquista. You take these Muslim masjids and you turn them into cathedrals, whatever. It's kind of like a reconquest culturally. Politically, Hindus have conquered India, but culturally, I think they're still trying to figure it out in terms of what the narrative is. And, these like past historical narratives they're fluid. The way you interpret them are different. So, for example, we haven't gotten into like, all like the historical details, which like, I know you like some of this too, but it's like, are the Mughals Indian or not? And it's just like all these like arguments between Hindu nationalists and, quote, secularists and liberals and some Muslims. And, it gets down to all sorts of weird, like, picky details, like, oh, well, like Shah Jahan was like 3/4 Hindu, whatever. And then the Hindu nationalists will be like, yeah, but like he was like a Ghazi. And it just like, it never ends. It's just like, it's just that, it's just like this vast, like whirling pool of screaming debate. And, it's really difficult to get resolution on. But, the fundamental issues are very simple. Like, is India a nation with Hindus, or is it a Hindu nation? And so I think that, yeah.
No,
go on.
One thing I noticed when I was traveling India, and I would try to talk to people of different ideologies. People on the left were basically despondent. I think they were pretty much like, it's just going to shit. People on the right, though, the way Hindutva or Hindu nationalism was, it was a very reactionary ideology, for sure. It was born out of reaction, 1000%. Now, though, people on the right are like, now is the time we start to, define ourselves. And now we define what a Hindu nation should be, what Hindutva should be, what are the ideas around caste, what are the ideas around like gender, what are the ideas around like linguistic diversity, sect diversity, how should Hinduism be expressed via politically or in a legal framework. So now there's there are camps forming, and there's a feeling amongst a lot of people on the right that we've not just politically defeated the left, we are dominating cultural space. So I'll give you an example. A lot of old Indian historians who used to be rock stars or intellectuals, if you go to their talks, it's mostly, like senior citizens there, or just like senior citizens and a few woke kids. But if you go to some of these rising like intellectual stars on the Indian right, their halls are packed with just all these young kids, and they are, enraptured by them. And you see that stark differential in terms of what's happening with Indian culture, where now there is also a cultural victory permeating. I think Ram Mandir, the Pran Pratishtha, that was like, in a way, India's cultural independence. If 1947 was India's political independence, this event was a cultural victory, and this was its cultural independence, I'd say. So it's definitely going to be a battle within Hindutva soon enough. I mean, there's still some loose ends they got to finish, a lot actually, but that idea is starting to creep into people's heads. Like, what are we really? We're not just reactionary. What are we actually going to be?
Yeah, it's interesting because these religions and these cultures, these civilizations, they have to evolve, they change. Like, they don't actually. Ultimately, you can't go back to 500 BC or whatever like
Yeah.
backward point in time. Like the Salafists in Islam, for example, they're not. They say that they're going back to like the beginnings of Islam, but this has like nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Like destroying Ottoman era mosques in Mecca has nothing to do with the beginnings of Islam. It's a very specific Saudi Salafist project of erasing the past and creating the future, which are like massive skyscrapers in Mecca. That is what Salafism is, right?
Mhm.
So within Hinduism, there's all these traditional groups, and like some of these quote trads online are very much into their caste, and others are not. So I mean, where do you think that sort of? So for example, Modi is not upper caste.
Yeah.
Are we? And like most of the prime ministers of India have been upper caste. Like a lot of them are Brahmins. Some of them are whatever. But they've been mostly, I think, with a few exceptions, upper caste. Do you think that Modi heralds a change insofar as the demographic majority, the voting majority of the population, which has always not been upper caste, is finally going to be represented? Because in the United States, for example, the person who's president is, kind of usually reflects the majority.
Yeah.
It's not whereas like in India you had like the Nehru was a Brahmin, like several others. Vajpayee was a Brahmin. This is like like 2, 3, 4% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little weird, although there's reasons for education and all these other things. So I guess what I'm asking is Modi heralding a popularization of Indian politics to the point where some of these like issues with caste are going to be less salient insofar as it's just like the majority demographic is reflected?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely so. Modi uses his caste and his class as a sword and shield. So he also comes from a poor background and, lower caste background. So that gives him a big defense against traditional accusations of the BJP as a upper caste party or favoring Brahmins or Baniyas and stuff like that. So that gives him a lot of cross, India appeal. And the idea about caste is front and center right now in the Indian election, because what Congress and the opposition have figured out and successfully executed in certain state elections is that if they rile up caste differences and kind of break this united coalition of Hindutva of these different castes, that's how they could deliver victory. So right now, Modi, for I think one of the first times I've heard him say, like, hey, I'm an OBC too. Like, these guys are talking about, the plight of OBCs, but I'm an OBC and I'm the biggest OBC. And I put I'm here representing you guys in parliament as the prime minister. That, I don't remember that type of rhetoric in term one. So this is you see this, push and pull here, where there was this big push of homogenization or say caste unity. And now there's this pushback from the opposition. So I think the net is obviously, pro unity, but it is going to go back and forth a little bit. But in general, and I was saying this when Pran Pratishtha happened, and this is another cultural point, Modi in Modi he's a Shudra. That's the fourth caste, the low caste in Hinduism. Him as a prime minister inaugurating this temple, which has a theological significance, not just political, cultural, or even just regular religious. This is a theological significance. This is something that will be recorded in Hindu history like 2, 3, 4, 5 millennia in the future, and it's going to be his name there. But he's a Shudra. That's not necessarily normal if you look at very ancient Indian history, where it's like Kshatriyas who are these great valiant kings, and they come from this illustrious, solar-born lineage. This guy's the son of a tea seller, but it was him that was chosen, quote unquote, by Sri Ram to inaugurate this temple. That carries theological significance. And that, what I was talking about, this turn in India and this change in even Hinduism itself, this is going to have ramifications in the future, where it's like, hey, Shudra or lowborn was used as an insult in the past in India, in ancient India. Now, though, this Shudra king or this prime minister, or this ruler, was the one who was chosen for this. So, yeah, I think it's going to have a lot of ramifications in a good way. And I think it's going to lessen a lot of the angst between castes and stuff like that. And Modi, in the long term, that's going to be another aspect of his legacy.
Yeah, let me just articulate something which I think is implicit in what you were saying. So, obviously in Hinduism, there are these communities, or like India, there are these communities, these jatis. That's how you live your life. Then there's the Varna, which is there's Brahmins, Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, which are the Banyas, and then you have the Shudras, and obviously Dalits at the bottom. The key, I think, what you're alluding to religiously is the three top castes, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, are the ones that get to study the scriptures in some way. Brahmins the most, but then they get the threads, so they're twice born. And the Shudras, they can be served by the Brahmins, but they themselves are not supposed to be taking a lead or studying these sorts of scriptures, right? In the classic Brahmanical model. This obviously changed with reformist movements in Hinduism. And so what you're seeing here is someone from a caste that, in this old school model that you get taught in the textbooks, is supposed to be a receptacle of learning, is now coming to the fore as a, kind of as a promoter of this religion. And it's kind of transforming, I think, upending these sorts of models. And so we don't really, look, I'm pretty sure that Hinduism is not going to become iconoclastic or something in the future, but we don't really know in the next century what's going to happen to this religion as the villages break down. People go to the urban areas. You're gonna have this sort of transformation that happened, I think, during the Reformation or something. Where it's medieval Catholicism kind of collapsed, and even the Catholicism of today is a reaction to the Protestant reformers in a way. So I think we're seeing this happening, I think, in the Indian context now.
So I would actually push back slightly on that. And I think this is, again, another part of Modi's political prowess and his, adeptus. Modi, so even though there's, this caste angle of the Pran Pratishtha and inauguration, him, leading from the fore, that's definitely different. And that's an affront to certain, old models. However, Modi specifically, he makes it a very big point to engage in a lot of the traditional, very ancient rituals of this event. He undertook a fast for 11 days. There's various other multi-day rituals that he made sure have to happen. So I think I don't think Hinduism or Hindu society would necessarily have as radical of a change as the Protestant Reformation. And also because of its decentralized nature, the Catholic Church, once you kind of break the bell of the Catholic Church, okay, now that's a huge, huge change. But in India, there's 10,000 of these mini Catholic churches. So I think there's always going to be a conservative and traditionalist bent to Hinduism. Even say so-called lower castes, they do value their rituals a lot, and they appreciated him adhering to this ritual religious rigor and integrating a lot of these monks and ascetics and even traditional Brahmin methods. So it's a balancing act in a way. I think India, in many cases, it will move at its own place, a quote unquote Hindu rate of growth in terms of change. To give an old economic analogy to this.
All right, so we've been talking for a while. By the way, I'll put this in the show notes, but you have a website, the Emissary. It's a repository of a lot of your writings over the years, and I think you're going to be doing more there. Everyone should check that out. But I want to ask you, close out, internet, online, like what's going on with Indians on Twitter?
Yo, man. I think firstly, it's two forces. One, Geo, which was this basically Mukesh Ambani, a billionaire from India. He used to do stuff in like steel and oil, I'm pretty sure. But he ventured into, telecom. And he basically started this very super, super, super low cost, almost free mobile network that transformed India. And then other carriers followed suit. So now a lot of people in India have cell phones, they have internet access, they're seeing the world for the first time. And I mean, India's like 1.4 billion people. So, and a lot of them speak English. So there's a tsunami coming online. And a lot of them, obviously, they don't engage in Western norms or Western culture as much. But and I think I'll bat for them here, and I think this might be the unpopular position. I'm being a bit nationalistic here. But I do think India has gotten a raw deal in terms of coverage prior, and the way they've talked about Hindus or Hinduism or Indian politics and stuff like that. So there's a deep-seated angst in a lot of Indians, and like I said, they don't like this global left stuff. So they get really pissed off about this, and they react with fire and fury. I guess that's just how Indian people argue. They're very passionate. So
Yeah.
you see that happening a lot.
Well, what India plus Israel, like this, like BFFs forever. Is that just an internet thing? Do you see any of that in India?
I think it's mostly an internet thing. People admire Israel for standing up to what they see as like, terrorism and Islamism and stuff like that. I think that's the main that's the sole reason they really admire Israel. Some Israelis come to the Himalayas and I think Goa after their service. I think that's a big tradition, but other than that, most people don't care about this conflict. I think it's a mostly internet thing. And also, the flip side, I think we talked about this earlier, like one of the downsides, in my opinion, of Elon's Twitter term has been a lot of 4chanification of Twitter. So that's a new thing that's happening where now this massive, horde of Indians is now going against these 4chan types. And you're seeing the, war on your timelines right now.
Metaphorical war, obviously. Okay, so we've been talking for a while, and it's been great catching up. Really enjoy your observations. I think we could go for a long time. This is a massive topic of a massive country and a massive civilization. I think some of the listeners, in particular, are really curious about what they're being told that's true about, Modi and the BJP and because of its relevance for geopolitics and, what's different on the ground there, because we hear a lot of extreme things in terms of religious persecution and other aspects of Indian society today. So I think definitely want to hear more from you about that because most of us are not going to, be visiting India. Although I think, over the next year, I think I will probably go at some point. I'm definitely going to check it out. Probably not this summer, too hot, but
yeah.
But aside from that, yeah. Okay, well, thank you for your time, Akshar. Check out the Emissary, and you have a good day, man.
Thanks, bro. Take it easy.
Even if you and your partner are healthy, there's still a chance your child can develop a serious genetic disease. This is because every embryo has new changes not present in either parent. Most of the time, these are benign, but sometimes they can be catastrophic. Orchid's whole genome embryo reports directly screen the embryo and analyze these de novo genetic mutations. Discuss embryo screening and IVF with a genetics expert.
This podcast for kids